Hello, everyone, and welcome to Center for Healthy Sex monthly webinar from Mirror of Intimacy. I'm Dr. Alex Katehakis, and today is Monday, January 10th, 2022. And thank you for joining us today. I want to remind you to type in any questions you have to the Q&A box so I can see them and answer them. And to go to Amazon if you want to order Mirror of Intimacy or leave us a review, even if it's 1 or 2 words, it's always much appreciated. And to follow me on Instagram as well. So today our topic is one that I'm very excited about talking about because I think it's deeply complex and interesting and can get confused, but can also have great joy and pleasure to it. So our topic is sexual abandon. And our quote is from Robert Mapplethorpe, who you may know was a highly controversial photographer in his time because he predominantly photographed images of men and male genitalia and gay images as well. And he says, when I have sex with someone, I forget who I am. For a minute, I even forget I'm human. It's the same thing when I'm behind the camera. I forget I exist. And what he's talking about there, I think, is emerging an experience of the transpersonal, of becoming one with. And this is sort of the ultimate experience that I think practitioners of sexual pleasure are seeking, whether it's from the tantric tradition or any other traditions that privilege pleasure over renunciation. So when we talk about sexual abandon in this context, we also talk about, we're looking at both sides of that coin. And it can be about completely surrendering to carnal desire that we see in books and movies and music videos and all of that. And there can also be a mythological component to that makes us feel like it's something that's reachable only for the gods, or it's out there somewhere. And it can also have us feeling diminished that our sex life doesn't look that way, or our experience of abandoning ourselves doesn't feel the way it's projected back to us in films, books, movies, etc. So I want you to think about your own sexual experience as we're talking here today, about your peak sexual experiences, the ones that you remember the most. And what were the qualities to that feeling of abandon, that feeling of giving up complete control, not necessarily to the other, because I think that can be a myth also. It's about giving up control to ourselves, to pleasure, to how much pleasure can I actually tolerate? How much pleasure can I take in? How much pleasure do I feel entitled to? And can I just allow the body to have this pleasurable experience in the way that Mapplethorpe is talking about when he says, I forget that I'm human. So he's not bound by the body in that statement. And as I said before, there's a merging experience with the other. And he has that same merging experience. I believe he had it when he was surrendering his ego and he became one with the camera. He was just looking and watching and seeing and noticing the distinct lines and beauty of the human form and the way that he perceived it. And I think what happens when people feel lost in their lives, and certainly if they have any kind of trauma in their background, whether it was physical, emotional, sexual, or neglect, then sexual abandon or losing oneself to sex and sexuality over and over and over again can be a panacea. It can be some sort of false promise into happiness. Into a joy state. The problem is that it's temporary. There's a temporary feeling of elation, a temporary feeling of extreme pleasure or novelty, but then it very quickly wears off. And of course, that's the peril of someone who's struggling with sexual addiction or out of control sexual behaviors, regardless of how you conceptualize it, it's still the same experience of loss of oneself in a way that doesn't feel healthy or life affirming. So I hope you can hear the paradox in this, that in sexual abandon that comes from, let's say, a healthy perspective, we're talking about a giving over of oneself, a loss of oneself to the other, a merger with the other. And with sexual addiction and compulsivity, similarly, it's a loss, though, to the sexual experience in service of making the person feel better temporarily. And all civilizations, I mean, Greek mythology popularized Dionysus, who was the god of wine and food and decadence. There was a chaotic passion to Dionysus that was irrational and really just carnal and wild. And every culture has that aspect to it, and life has that aspect to it. And I think with Dionysus, the celebration was through orgiastic sex and food and drinking. And we've all had that experience in our lives too. But that is not a sustainable way of being in the world. And we want to experience erotic and chaotic passion with someone in a moment of sexual abandon, but not to the detriment of ourselves or to our partner. So our culture's current focus on sexual abandon usually is talking about promiscuity or a lot of anonymous sex, and risk taking and going past one's own limits also. And I do think it's important in each person's sexual experience to push up against our limits, to see, well, do I like that or don't I like that? And how do I know unless I actually try it? And sometimes we might try things that push us past our limits, that leave us feeling bad about ourselves afterwards, or scared, or like, okay, that was fun and I'm glad I did it, but I'm not doing that again because it was too dangerous, or it made me feel too gross or dirty or shameful afterwards. And sometimes we can't know where that line is unless we try. So the sort of sexual abandon that doesn't result from what we would call emotionally sober decision making can leave us in trouble. And it's good to talk to friends about that, close friends, obviously, if you're going to try something that feels a little unusual or bizarre or kinky, or kind of out there, but you want to try it. To use your good judgment and always to talk to someone about it, hopefully a trusted other that you can talk about it with, because planned sexual abandonment is not a contradiction in terms. So many people are allergic to planning their sexual experiences, but you plan all sorts of things in life. And when you plan them, you can look forward to them. You're excited about them, whether it's a trip to Hawaii or a dinner that you're really looking forward to, or a party. Those are planned experiences. So likewise, you can plan a sexual experience that has good communication, trust, empathy, a whole container around it that allows for you to be fully free and abandoned sexually. So we have a question here that says, what about the opposite for someone who has had trauma, abuse, and neglect? Being unable to truly engage sexually and sensually, being unable to truly surrender to carnal passions, including erectile dysfunction. Well, I would say that you're probably moving too quickly. That one of the tragedies of the world today, or our culture, I think, is that we're focusing a lot on penetrative sex and on orgasm and on erection, for sure. And if you're not getting an erection, then you have to understand that means you're not turned on. And if you're not turned on, it's probably because you don't feel safe, or you don't feel like you're doing something that you want to do, or what you're doing is arousing. And so I would highly recommend that you start with very, very simple moves that have to do with touch, and places where you can trust a partner to touch you and where you don't want to be touched. But first, by letting your partner have free reign over your body to touch you, just tell them where you don't want to be touched, and then tolerate what it feels like to be touched. and to breathe into that and to not have this focus on erection or any kind of penetration, and see if that can help slow you down. I would also turn you to Wendy Maltz's work. I believe her website is sexualhealth.com. Eliza will type it into the chat box for you. And she works a lot with sexual abuse survivors, and all of her books are geared towards simple exercises that can help people, move towards having pleasure without going past their capacity to tolerate it. Let's see, someone else says, if you're in recovery from sex and love addiction, how do you know when a sexual desire is healthy and when it's just a trigger, or even a return to addictive behaviors? Well, I would suggest that you talk that through with someone that you trust, and that's what sponsors are for, and close friends and trusted others. I can't answer that question because it's too broad and I don't know you. But I guess I would say generally, if it evokes shame that feels dirty or wrong or bad, you want to investigate why that shame is coming up. Is that shame that's really organic and true to you? Or is that a shameful message that you got a long time ago? Like, what is actually true for you? And my workbook, Sexual Reflections, really helps people walk through that in granular detail so you can get clear about what turns you on and what do you like and what don't you like and what aligns with your trauma and your addiction versus what you're now calling your new sexual health plan. Pursuing sexual abandon, I think, is a goal in the erotic, and it requires relinquishing control over the situation, over our lives, but also not rushing headfirst into gratification so that you're not being impulsive, but you're also not being restrictive. And again, these are the paradoxes inherent in sex and sexuality. No matter where on the continuum you are, whether you've never had sex before, or you've been sexually abused, or you consider yourself sexually addictive or compulsive or engaging in out of control sexual behaviors, you have to make friends with shame first and foremost. And what I mean by that is you've got to deconstruct the shame. You have to really look at where that shame is coming from. Is it genuinely yours? Or is it something that was handed down to you that actually doesn't really belong to you? So spend some time looking at that with someone that you trust. And pursuing any kind of pleasure, I think, is a good place to start. And I've talked about this before, where we think about the erotic in day-to-day life, where we think about the sensuality of waking up in a warm bed, if you're lucky, and what it feels like to be in that warm bed. There's a sensual, cocoon-like feeling to that. And to notice that means that you're engaging in the erotic. When you get up, to feel the chill on your body. Hopefully it's not too violent, depending on how cold your climate is, as your feet touch the floor and you wrap yourself into something that's warm or cozy. That feeling of water on your face for the first time when you wake up. The first warm drink that you sip. All of those are sexual engagements if you're really present with what's happening with you and your body. And unfortunately, we live in a culture that's constantly grabbing our attention to look outside of ourselves, to turn on the news, to see what somebody else is doing, wearing. You know, we live in this Instagrammable world where everybody else's bed, bedroom, cup of coffee, you name it, looks so much better than what we have. And honestly, it's the same thing. It's just packaged differently. So be interested in what you have and get close to who you are so you start to know yourself. Because when you know yourself, then you can communicate that to someone else. And that's when sex becomes pleasurable and fun and erotic, and what Peggy Kleinplatz calls sex worth having. When you're having sex worth having, then you're much more interested in it than when you're having sex that you really don't like, or feels boring or kind of dried up or dead for you. So, cautious contemplation of sexual abandon can often be constructed as sex negative or puritanical, which is really ludicrous. This anything goes mentality starts to get people into all kinds of trouble and snarls, and worst of all, disliking themselves. So don't be afraid to say, I like this, I don't like that, I want this, I don't want that, because I've thought it through and I've tried it. And this is the truth of who I am, because each individual sexuality is so unique and so different that it can't be prescribed. It's not one size fits all. And just because you saw it in porn or your friend did it doesn't mean that it's right for you, any more than you would be wearing your friend's clothing or eating the food that they like because you don't like it. So we have a question here. If we had to let go to attain sexual abandon, and this trust has been devastated, and that sexual partner becomes the reminder of shame due to a break of a promise of the commitment to the relationship, how is this to be overcome? Well, it can only be overcome if both parties are willing to work on it, but you cannot overcome it by yourself. And I get this question a lot from partners that seem both devastated and at their wits' end and desperately trying to make something work that's not working. So couples therapy, sex therapy is always a couples issue. It's never an individual issue if you're in some sort of coupleship. If you're single and having sex with different people, then you can't really bring your lovers into, well, you could, but people generally don't bring their lovers into therapy with them. They're looking at what's happening for them. But in a case like this, where trust has been broken and there's been devastation, that is a long road to healing. And without a formal disclosure process and lots of work on both people's part, it's very difficult to come to a clearing that even says we want to be sexual again. And when you are sexual again, where is the starting point for that? But you can't leapfrog the process of the individual and collective healing to get there. Christopher writes, following up, I was not referring to penetrative sex, merely sexual foreplay that excites me, but not result in an erection. My ED has been with me since my 20s, and I'm in my 60s. I've been in therapy for years, have always been turned on by the idea of being with a dominatrix, and such moments are not penetrative. That's correct. Other scenarios turn me on and make for great masturbation, but not an erection while playing with a partner. Well, maybe you need to invoke some of your preferences into your sex play with your partner, which I would imagine meaning your partner taking a dominating role in your sexuality. Because if that's your sexual arousal template and that's what works for you, then there's no point in ignoring that. But you have to find a partner that's willing to engage with you in those spaces. And that takes a lot of trust, an enormous amount of communication, transparency, authenticity, empathy between the two of you. So the point is, it requires a lot of conversation about how you get to that point without scaring somebody off right from the beginning. So when we think about what is out there today, just like this man's statement, there was a time when people would have interpreted much of what we take for granted today as shameless abandoned, like wearing sleeveless t-shirts or group dancing or sex talk or female sexual pleasure, any of that. So don't be afraid to be honest about what turns you on sexually, and to be in conversations, for yourself with a therapist if necessary, with good friends, and then with sexual partners, so you can start to get a clear picture of what's right for you. So we can't ignore the repressive threats of sex negativity either, because they're still out there. There are plenty of people, plenty of therapists that will prescribe to you what's okay sexually and what isn't. There are religious ideas and notions about this. There are cultural notions about it. In some cases, we've swung so far in the opposite direction. I mean, here in the United States, where Everybody gets their sex education from pornography, and nobody really knows who they are sexually. They just do what's important because they think that's what men or women want, but they don't really know what they want. And then they do it and they're like, why am I doing this? Or, okay, I tried that, but I wasn't really into it. And so I really am making the case here, for people to get deeply curious in their sexuality, in the same way you get deeply curious about your body if you decide you're going to start working out. If you're working with the trainer, you very quickly come up against how much weight you can lift, where you're strong, where you're weak, where your biomechanical imbalances are. Why one leg is stronger than the other, or one arm is stronger than the other, or why upper body exercises are harder than lower body exercises, just all of it. You start to get to know the physical body. And likewise, when you start to get to know the sexual body, then you're on the road to having great sex, because you know your body, you know your sexuality, you know what turns you on. And then when you can communicate that to another, that sets the stage for sexual abandon and the erotic to really come into play. Someone states, I've struggled with sexual addiction and have been at a place where I don't look at pornography anymore. My question is, how do I know if masturbation is compulsive or normal or healthy? Well, I think that is really kind of an age-old question. And I would say that if your masturbation leaves you feeling good afterwards, if the themes of your masturbation, your fantasies, for example, are something you could share with a partner without feeling embarrassed or ashamed, and if you do feel embarrassed or ashamed, find out why you do, then you're likely on the right track. But I think you will know if you've been compulsive about masturbation historically, you'll know very quickly if it's becoming compulsive again. So this is why people put boundaries and limitations around their masturbation when they're in recovery. And again, this is really important to talk to a sponsor or a trusted other about this. What would be appropriate for you? What are the conditions under which you do it? Do you do it only in the daytime? Do you only do it twice a week? Are you required to do it at home and not elsewhere? Because many people that are compulsive do it in their cars or at work and have troubles with that. So what are the conditions that keep it boundaried, and have you connected to the pleasure in your body, not living in chronic fantasy, which can be dissociative and problematic for many different reasons. So this is a deeper investigation for you and your sobriety with your therapist and your sponsor and other people in program. Someone writes, after being in the same relationship for 35 years, I'm now separated from my sex addict spouse and venturing onto the dating scene. I've had the opportunity to sleep with other men, but so far not interested in anyone, and have never been a one-night stand kind of person with sexual diseases out there. Just taking it slow, but feeling ready to connect with somebody. Any words of wisdom? Well, it's nice to hear from you, first of all. And I would think that you have enough good intuition to know when something feels right and when it doesn't. And it's interesting to me, and especially as I've gotten older, how sexual chemistry is such an important thing, and it has nothing to do with looks, with how the person looks. It has to do with an intelligence, a sense of humor, a vibe, and it doesn't come along that often. And so I would recommend that you be willing to say more than you're willing to say yes, so that when you say yes, it feels really right to you and it feels good. Now, having said that, there's value in having casual sex with somebody that's sexy enough, just because you feel like being in your body and you feel like having a sense of vitality and feeling alive. So just choose carefully the way that you've been doing. And also, I think you're probably pretty clear about what you do and don't like and want sexually at this point. So have those conversations with the person before you have sex with them. I've said recently that, wouldn't it be great if people talk to people about what they like sexually over dinner in the same way we talk about what kind of movies we like and where we like to travel. So as you date someone or get to know them or go out with them a couple of times, talk about sex and listen for how open they are, how hung up they are, how much you feel like they're actually being truthful or they're holding back from you. Someone says here, what if one's arousal are unhealthy in nature and prevail the needs of oneself, which might not have been met in childhood and reflected in one's sexuality? Well, if they're unhealthy in nature, then I don't know what that means, if other people think it's unhealthy or it's unhealthy for you. But these sorts of things require deep investigation in therapy. Some of these things we cannot figure out ourselves because human beings require community. We need other people to be in conversation with, to hear ourselves think out loud. And trying to figure this out alone usually doesn't go well. So I suggest you talk to a therapist about that, because these sound like they're longstanding patterns that you feel like you're repeating. And if we're repeating longstanding patterns that are sexual, we're really a slave to those. We are not free to investigate the full spectrum of our sexuality, which really is like a rainbow. When we start to see that we're interested in all sorts of things. But if you have been sexually abused or were emotionally abused or physically abused, your sexual template can be very narrow. And I've seen this in sex addicts for over 20 years. It can be very unimaginative sex because these are adaptive strategies and they're encoded both in the brain and the body. And so it's like if you never knew there was anything else to drink in the world besides water, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, honestly, but you didn't know that there were flavored drinks and wines and beers and all of that. And you had no idea what you liked or didn't like because you never ventured out of that one realm. So really give yourself the gift of getting into therapy and untangling all of that so you can find out what's true for yourself. So whether we're in a committed relationship or protecting our sexual health or responsibilities like work and family and things like that, then the flip side of sexual abandon might be that it's really a form of avoidance or self-abandon. So be careful about, I think we're using this term interchangeably here, but let's use the term healthy. Like what is healthy, what is unhealthy for you? Like someone just wrote earlier about having sex with people and not really being into one night stands or too much casual sex is great. But if you have an experience and you say, oh, that was great, I really enjoyed that, versus, that was kind of boring or not so terrific. And I did it because I was really bored, or I did it because I was missing my ex-husband, or I did it for, I don't know, I really didn't want to do it, but I did it anyway. And so I'm going to be more discerning than that next time. When I decide to have sex with somebody, it's going to be a resounding yes, as opposed to a maybe. Because if it's maybe, you could stay home and masturbate and still release tension and not be bothered with all of the extraneous what is the word really? Not issues, but the extraneous energy that goes with being in somebody's energy field. Because when we're in close proximity to another, and especially when we're being sexual, kissing, touching, if there is penetration, that is an enormous commingling of energies with that human being. And that's a lot, especially if you're sensitive. You're taking on a lot when you take that on. I think when we're in our 20s, we're much more impervious to the invitation of those energies. We can churn them a lot faster. But as we get older and we're more sensitive, we take those energies on in ways that we may not even be aware of. So we want to be careful about that. So when we understand it that way, sexual abandon can ironically perpetrate inhibitions because we're blocking our real experiences and we're numbing our highest functions. So don't go headstrong or headlong into something you're not sure of. Take some time, be discerning, plan your sexual abandonment. And that way you're more likely to have a really great erotic experience. We have another question here. How can the temperature of a potential partner's sexual template be felt if you do not have sex out of a marriage? I don't understand that question. The template of a potential partner's, the temperature of a potential partner's template. Yeah, I don't understand that. I think you have to be explicit in your questioning of people. And I think that's one of the things that we have to get over is our discomfort and our fear about asking people exact questions about what they like sexually. And when they tell us what they like sexually, not getting squeamish or rolling our eyes or getting judgmental, but getting curious about, wow, tell me more about that. Or how often have you done that? Or what about that do you like? If we go back to the gentleman that was talking about being dominated, if you met him and you were presumably female, and you found him attractive and you liked him and you had fun with him, and he said, you know, my primary sexual interest is that I like to be dominated. You can freak out in that moment, or you can say, tell me more about that, because domination runs a big continuum. And you have to know where you are on that continuum, as opposed to it's just a resounding no across the board, which maybe it is for you, I don't know. But when he starts to describe what that means for him, you may find yourself being intrigued or even a little aroused. If he were in the realm of, and this is not our participant here, but a hypothetical person that was in the realm of, you know, extreme violence or extreme measures, that may be something that's too unusual, or that frightens you, or that you say, you know, you're a great person and I've had a lot of fun with you, but I know that I have a limitation here and I wouldn't enjoy that. And I wouldn't even enjoy the exploration of that. So it's probably best that we, you know, say goodbye here and we remain friends. Or I have a friend that's really into that I'd like to fix you up with. So it can go a lot of different ways, but it's about the willingness to risk being vulnerable through conversation long before you take your clothes off. So this person writes back again, how do you assess the compatibility of sexuality so that you can find out if you're compatible even without trying it? Well, my point is you have long conversations about it. That's what you do. You have detailed conversations about what turns you on sexually. And until you know what's really true for you, and also you're not carting around your trauma template, you cannot be in a constructive conversation with someone like that. So I would advise you to take a look at sexual reflections. I also have a workbook coming out this year called What Turns You On, that has nothing to do with sexual addiction or compulsivity, but is strictly to ask that question, what turns you on? And it's a very fun look at deconstructing cultural messages, family messages, and really exploring, you know, what is arousing for me today, and also looking at how that's malleable and how it changes over time. Paul writes, I really like the way you're handling this topic. Abandoning oneself into a safe, boundaried space with a consenting partner is an opportunity to become exquisitely vulnerable to the emotion of the moment. Thank you for conceptualizing that, Paul. Yes. That is where great sex, where magnificent sex, where fantastic sex happens. And it happens in these explicit conversations. And in fact, the research that's come from the University of Ottawa that's delineated in the book Magnificent Sex worked with couples. It's an ongoing research project, but the modal age were people in their 50s. And these people 50 and older were much more comfortable talking about who they were sexually than people that were younger. And so we can learn a lot from this by saying, let's stop being so embarrassed and ashamed about talking about our genitals, about talking about our sexuality and what we want and need as adults, and engaging in this really adolescent kind of groping in the dark, trying to second guess behavior. And then we end up projecting all of our upset onto our partner, like they weren't good lovers, or they didn't intuit what I needed, which is all ridiculous. No one can intuit what kind of lubrication you like unless you tell them. This is the product I buy. This is the product I like. There's no way for someone to know. They could actually bring something in service of fun or being sexy, and bring something that you've tried that's really uncomfortable for your body or that you don't like. So you don't know unless you talk about these things. Do you like sex toys? If not, why not? What sex toys do you like? Which ones have you tried? Which ones would you like to try together? All of those things are about being a grown-up and having a grown-up sexuality. Can you recommend a book, a video, or other practices for practicing intimacy exercises? I don't know what you mean by that because I'm not inclined to giving people exercises. I am inclined to getting people to talk about their sexuality with each other. So if you can let me know about what kind of exercises you're talking about, Sarah. I would also let all of you know that on January 25th, my colleague Bob Mendelson and I are conducting a partners workshop here for people who experience low sexual desire. So low sexual desire has to be the issue. It's a Zoom workshop that goes for 8 weeks. It's 2 hours a week for 8 weeks, and it's limited to 4 or 5 couples. So it's very, very limited. It's going to fill up quickly. We already have people on a list now, but if this is something that appeals to you, you can call our intake line at 310-843-9902 so that we can assess you to see if you're right for this workshop. But this is not for couples that are warring. This is not for couples that have newly discovered that somebody's been unfaithful. This is for couples that have been healing for a while, that have decided they want to be sexual again, but they're struggling, or one party has low sexual desire and they don't know quite how to get it together again. So we're very excited about offering this, and we'll be offering it with some regularity. So to start to wrap this up, our healthy sex acts for today start with asking you the question of what is the allure that you find in sexual abandon? Is it a positive allure? Is it a negative allure? In other words, is it positive in that just the idea of completely losing yourself in the way Mapplethorpe talked about, merging with another, not knowing you're human anymore, feeling like your body is completely a pleasure instrument, attractive to you? Or is sexual abandon a way for you to numb the pain of the past, to lose yourself because you can't stand yourself, and then it makes you feel even worse afterwards? So think of clear examples of sexual abandon in your life, and then consider the surrounding circumstances. What underlying issues were being abandoned? What were peak sexual experiences? What were the components of that you want to replicate? And what were the experiences that created problems for you or made you feel badly in the past? And I have plenty of examples of both. Certainly, I think about what I did to myself in my late teens and early 20s. And there were many, many times when I hurt myself by putting myself in the hands of people that were unsafe. And that was because of my lack of boundaries. And I was seeking love in all the wrong places, as they say. Someone says, can we become generators of intense sexual arousal instead of arousing being dependent of our partners? Yes. And I think that's the tantric path. The tantric path is all about generating our own sexual energy. And many times this is conducted through exercises that have to do with breath and breathing. So deep belly breathing, breathing into the genitals, arousing our own, first and second chakras is a way of generating our own sexual energy. And that's also a nice practice before meeting your partner for planned sexual experiences. So if you know what turns you on, I've said this before, halfway in jest, but in truth, that, for women, having a massage, taking a hot bath, hot water is extremely relaxing to the nervous system. Grooming, preparation for sex and sexuality is a way of offering ourselves to our lovers, can be extremely self-generating arousal. So find out what that is for you, and you can bring that to your masturbation. And that way, masturbation isn't just about pornographic images and getting off. It's about investigating pleasure in the body and bringing pleasure to one's own body. Another question here is, so someone asks, exploring tantric sexuality, I would turn you to my good friend and colleague, Dawn Cartwright. Dawn offers a number of tantric Zoom classes. She was doing many, many things in person, but she's here in Santa Monica. And Melissa will type her information into the chat box also. Is there any benefit to truly trying to uncover the nature of the abuse I endured? I was one of 5 children, abusive alcoholic family. Boy, that's a lot of history. So yes, I would say that there is value in that, because when you can unwind that, and you can make sense of it, sometimes these, interesting choice of word, domineering arousal templates start to soften, and you don't feel so enslaved by them. So all of that language is recursive, as you can hear, that you are enslaved and dominated by your abuse, and you can't cut free of it. You can't even, to your point, enjoy foreplay with a partner and find that arousing, because you've got this dominant arousal template. So I do think there is value in psychotherapy for that, not as a way to repair you out of your erotic template, but as a way for you to better understand it and maybe even get some freedom around it so that it's less constraining of you. Someone is asking about the sexual health. I think Wendy Maltz's website was put up in the chat box, Dylan. So if you'll double check that, you'll find that there. Okay, so I don't know that we have any other questions here about this topic. I think I've left you with a number of really terrific resources today, and really want to impress upon you as we go into this brand new year to put forth as one of your intentions and one of your goals is to really get to know yourself sexually this year, and not in ways that feel distorted or perverse or create self-loathing. And I'm going to even say something that's a little controversial and ask you to step away from pornography, because you're watching other people have sex, and get interested in your body and what turns you on and how that body likes to have sex. And whether it's through experimentation with a lover here or there, obviously not if you're in a relationship where you have a vow of monogamy. If you don't have a vow of monogamy, that's a different matter. If you're single, certainly choosing sexual partners, choosing lovers wisely, not indiscriminately, or just scattershot with a bunch of random people, but somebody who wants to go on that journey with you, that's interested in their sexual exploration, and go to different workshops and listen to different practitioners, read about sex and sexuality, the way you would if you were taking some fantastic trip and preparing for it. If I told you you want an all expense paid vacation to the Greek islands this summer, you would probably start studying Greek, so you could say hello, goodbye, and thank you, and looking at the map of the islands and thinking about what to wear and what kind of suntan lotion you wanted and what the food was like, and reading about the history. You would really start to engage in preparation for this spontaneous experience you're going to have. So treat your sex life in the same way. Someone's asking about substituting written erotica for video porn. I think that's fine, because that may also give you an idea of what you like. I mean, certainly writing and reading activates the imagination. And that's what we want. We want your sexual imagination to come alive, your intuition, your sexual creativity. I had a friend once who was in his 50s who'd gotten divorced, and he was dating and starting to have sex again. And he said to me, he couldn't believe how uncreative people were sexually today, because he'd been married for 20 years. And it's true. Everybody's got these porn moves, as opposed to just allowing themselves to be free and natural and maybe even kind of goofy or weird. Who cares? You've got to be able to laugh at yourself. But anything that sparks your imagination, that moves you closer to you, is what we're looking for here. Sexual Abandon makes me think of lyrics from Leonard Cohen's favorite song, I remember when I moved in you, and the holy dove she was moving to, and every single breath that we drew was hallelujah. Can you say any final words about the merging with the other that sexual abandon can make possible? Yes, that's a beautiful, beautiful lyric from him. I think that what makes this possible, and you'll find it in the book Magnificent Sex, Lessons from Extraordinary Lovers. The research team has really teased out 8 different factors that make for this emergence of extraordinary sex, which allows for complete abandonment, transcendence, excitation. And it all goes back to this point of knowing oneself and being able to communicate it. So when you feel like the container is sealed, when you trust your lover, when you trust that your lover knows that no means no and yes means yes, and where the boundaries and limits are, and the two of you have created and set a stage that you've both agreed upon, then the sky's the limit. So that's a lovely note to end on. I wish you all the very best in the new year, and that you have a very pleasurable, luscious, erotic sexuality this year. And I look forward to hearing your reports about just that. So take good care, and I look forward to seeing you in February, the month that's designated towards love. So we'll talk more about love and less about sex, perhaps, in February. All right, take care, everyone, and Happy New Year.